Walking into his private gym, Dominic Corban expected to find his blind daughter playing with dolls, watched over by the woman hired to scrub his floors. Instead, the East Coast's most lethal man found his child throwing a perfect punch. The maid wasn't just cleaning the house, she was training a soldier. Before Dominic could pull the trigger on the instructor, a secret tumbled out. A truth so dark it paralyzed the Don where he stood. The enemy wasn't waiting at the gate. He was already inside the walls. And the only person capable of saving them was the very help Dominic was seconds away from executing. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Dominic Corban stared out the tinted window of his armored SUV, watching the iron gates of the Corban estate swing open. It was 2:00 a.m. He wasn't supposed to be home for another 3 days. The deal in Chicago had gone south. Bodies had dropped and Dominic had flown back early, his patience frayed like a wire, ready to snap. He rubbed his temples. He was 34, but in this life that was ancient. He was the Don of the Corban crime family, a man who had buried his emotions, along with his late wife Isabella, 3 years ago. All he had left was Nancy. Nancy, 7 years old, blind since the car accident that took her mother. She was his porcelain doll, fragile, broken, and the only thing keeping him tethered to humanity. He kept her in the West Wing, surrounded by nurses, tutors, and guards. He treated her like glass. "Boss, you want me to wake the staff?" His head of security, a brute named Kyle, asked from the front seat. "No," Dominic grunted, stepping out into the drizzle. "Go to the barracks. I want silence." He entered the manor. It was a mausoleum of marble and shadows. He loosened his tie, the adrenaline of the Chicago hit fading into a dull ache. He walked toward the kitchen for a drink, but a sound stopped him. Thud. It was faint, rhythmic. Ideally, at 2:00 a.m., the house should be dead. The sound was coming from the old solarium at the back of the house, a room he had converted into a private dojo years ago but rarely used. Dominic's hand went instantly to the Sig Sauer tucked in his waistband. He moved silently, his Italian leather shoes making no sound on the hardwood. An intruder, a mole. He reached the double oak doors of the solarium. They were cracked open an inch. He peered through the gap. The room was dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through the glass ceiling. The mats were cleared. In the center of the room stood 2 figures. One was Sarah, the new maid. She had been with them for 3 months, quiet, efficient, plain-faced. She wore baggy clothes and kept her head down. Dominic barely knew her surname. Jenkins Johnson. She was just a ghost who folded laundry. But the woman in the room wasn't a ghost. She was standing with her feet shoulder-width apart, her center of gravity. Lo, her posture radiating a lethal kind of discipline. And facing her was Nancy. Dominic's breath hitched. His blind daughter, who usually navigated the world with a trembling white cane, was barefoot on the mats. She wasn't trembling. She was listening. "Again," Sarah whispered. Her voice wasn't the meek, servile tone she used when serving coffee. It was steel. "I can't," Nancy whined softly. "I can't see where you are, Sarah." "You don't need eyes to see, Nancy." "Eyes lie," Sarah said, circling the girl slowly. "Listen to the friction. My foot on the canvas, the shift in the air pressure. Where am I?" Dominic watched his finger tightening on the trigger. "What the hell is she doing to my daughter?" Sarah lunged. Not a playful lunge, a strike. Dominic almost kicked the door in right then, but what happened next froze him. Nancy didn't flinch. She dropped. She ducked under Sarah's arm, spun on her heel, and drove her small palm into Sarah's solar plexus. It wasn't a child's flailing. It was a calculated counter-move. Sarah stumbled back, grinning. Good, again. Harder this time. If they grab you, you break the thumb. Show me. Dominic had seen enough. He kicked the doors open. The boom echoed like a gunshot. Get away from her! Sarah spun around. For a split second, Dominic saw it, the reflex. She didn't cower. Her hands twitched toward her belt line before she forced them down and adopted the posture of a terrified servant. Mr. Corbin! Sarah gasped, stepping back. Nancy froze her head, snapping toward his voice. Papa! Dominic crossed the room in 3 strides. He grabbed Sarah by the throat and slammed her against the mirrored wall. The glass shuddered. What do you think you're doing? Dominic roared, his face inches from hers. She is a child. She is blind. You're teaching her violence. Sarah clawed at his hand. Her eyes wide but surprisingly clear. Let me explain. I should put a bullet in your head right now, Dominic hissed. You're fired. No, you're dead. Kyle! He shouted for his guard. Papa, stop! Nancy screamed. She scrambled toward the sound of them tripping over her own feet, reverting to the clumsy child he knew. She grabbed Dominic's leg. Don't hurt her. I asked her to. I asked her. Dominic looked down at his daughter, then back at the maid, pinned under his grip. Why? He demanded, his voice shaking with rage. Why would you teach a blind 7-year-old how to kill? Sarah stopped struggling. She looked Dominic dead in the eye, dropping the maid persona entirely. The fear vanished, replaced by a cold, hard look that Dominic recognized. It was the look of a soldier. Because, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. The accident that took her sight wasn't an accident, Dominic, and the people who cut her brake lines, they're coming back for her. Tonight. Dominic's grip loosened. The silence in the room was deafening. What did you say, Tal? Check your perimeter alarms, boss, Sarah said, smoothing her apron as if she hadn't just been choked. The reason I'm teaching her to fight in the dark is because in 10 minutes the power is going to be cut, and you and I are going to be the only things standing between Nancy and a hit squad. Dominic stared at her. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the woman who scrubbed his toilets with the woman currently issuing tactical warnings. You're lying, Dominic said, though his gut told him otherwise. He pulled his radio from his belt. Kael, status report. Now. Static. Kael. Nothing but white noise. Dominic felt a chill crawl up his spine. The perimeter comms were hardwired. They didn't just go down. He looked at Sarah. Who are you? My name is Natasha Voigt, she said, stripping off the oversized cardigan she wore to reveal a tactical holster strapped to her ribs. She pulled a Glock 19 from the small of her back, a gun Dominic hadn't even noticed. I was Interpol, Organized Crime Division, but right now I'm the only friend you have. Dominic raised his own gun, aiming it at her chest. Interpol. You're a rat. I was Interpol, she corrected, stepping in front of Nancy protectively. I went rogue 6 months ago when I found out my superiors were selling information to the Venezia cartel, the same cartel that sabotaged your wife's car. The Venezia. Dominic's blood ran cold. The Venezia were his rivals, but they had a truce, a blood pact. If they had killed Isabella, why are you here? Dominic demanded. Why hide as a maid? Because nobody looks at the help, Dominic, Natasha said. I needed to get close to Nancy. I knew they botched the job 3 years ago. The contract was for the whole family. They want the bloodline ended. I've been tracking their chatter. The order went out this morning. Finish the little bird. Click. Suddenly the lights in the solarium died. The entire estate plunged into darkness. Nancy whimpered. "It's starting," Natasha whispered. Dominic's night vision needed a moment to adjust, but he felt Natasha move. She didn't fumble. She moved with the silent grace of a predator. "Nancy." Natasha's voice was calm, anchoring the child. "Remember the game, hide in the echo. Go to the safe spot. Now." "But Papa is going to play the game too," Natasha lied smoothly. "Go, under the floorboards in the pantry, just like we practiced. Don't come out until you hear the code word." "Code word is sunrise," Nancy whispered, then turned and ran. Dominic was stunned. She ran through the pitch-black room without stumbling, navigating the obstacles by memory and sound, vanishing into the hallway. Dominic turned his weapon toward the glass doors leading to the garden. He could see shadows moving across the lawn. 5, no 6 men. Tactical gear. Night vision goggles. "They have thermal," Dominic cursed. "We're sitting ducks in here." "Not quite," Natasha said. She moved to a wall panel and ripped it open, pulling a lever Dominic didn't know existed. Heavy steel shutters slammed down over the glass walls of the solarium, sealing them in. "I modified your security system while you were in Chicago," she said casually. "Hope you don't mind." "You rewired my house?" Dominic asked, incredulous. "I fortified your castle. You have 3 minutes before they breach the front doors. Kyle and the gate guards are likely dead or silenced." Dominic looked at this woman, this stranger standing in the dark with him. He was a man who trusted no one. In his world, trust got you killed. But he had just watched her send his daughter to safety, with a proficiency that suggested they had been preparing for this nightmare for months. "Why?" Dominic asked, checking the magazine of his cig. "Why save us? You're a Fed. I'm a criminal." Natasha looked at him, her eyes catching the faint moonlight from the skylight above. "Because I'm a mother, Dominic. Or I was. The Venezia took my son to get to me. I couldn't save him." Her voice cracked just for a millisecond before hardening again. "I'm not letting them take yours." Boom! An explosion rocked the front of the house. The front doors had been breached. "Kitchen," Dominic commanded, his leadership instincts taking over. "It's a choke point. We hold them there." "Agreed," Natasha said. "But Dominic, what, if we survive this, you can fire me. But until then, you take orders from me on close quarters defense. You're a boss, you give orders. I'm an operator, I execute them. In this house in the dark, I'm the captain." Dominic gritted his teeth. His ego bristled, but he looked at the steel in her eyes. "Lead the way, Maid." They moved into the hallway. The air smelled of cordite and rain. The silence of the house was gone, replaced by the heavy thud of boots on marble. The enemy was inside. As they crept toward the kitchen, Dominic realized the horrifying truth of Natasha's words. He had been so busy building an empire to protect his daughter that he hadn't noticed the walls were made of paper. It took a woman scrubbing his floors to turn his house into a fortress. They reached the grand foyer balcony. Below, 8 men in black tactical gear were sweeping the room with laser sights. "Silencers," Natasha whispered. "They want this quiet." "I don't do quiet," Dominic growled. "Neither do I," she replied. She reached into her apron pocket, which Dominic now realized was a tactical pouch, and pulled out a flashbang. "On 3, she mouthed. Dominic nodded. He leveled his gun over the railing. 1, 2, 3. She dropped the grenade. It bounced once on the marble floor below. The men looked down. Flash! A blinding white light erupted, followed by a deafening bang. "Go!" Natasha yelled. Dominic and Natasha vaulted over the railing, dropping 10 feet to the floor below. Guns blazing before their feet even touched the ground. The battle for the Corbin estate had begun. But as Dominic fired, taking down the first target, a thought nagged at the back of his mind. How did the Venezia know to strike tonight? How did they know the exact moment he returned? Someone close to him had sold him out. And as he looked at Natasha moving with lethal precision, covering his blind side, he realized she was the only person in the room he hadn't paid to be loyal. And she was the only one fighting like she had something to lose. The kitchen of the Corbin estate was a masterpiece of Italian design, marble islands, copper pots and floor-to-ceiling windows. Right now, it was a kill box. Dominic and Natasha slid across the polished tiles, just as the glass windows shattered inward, spraying the room with shards. Bullets chewed into the mahogany cabinets. "Down!" Natasha screamed, shoving Dominic behind the heavy marble island. She didn't cower. She popped up, fired 2 controlled shots, and ducked back down. 2 cries of pain echoed from the garden. "We can't stay here." Dominic gritted out, checking his magazine. "I have an armory in the basement, but the stairs are exposed." "Forget the basement," Natasha snapped, checking her watch. "They have a second team breaching the south wall. We have 90 seconds before we're pincered. We need to move. Where is the garage access?" "Through the pantry," Dominic said, pointing to a narrow door. "Nancy, stay low. Hold my belt," Natasha commanded. The little girl was trembling, her hands clamped over her ears, but she obeyed instantly. They moved in a tight formation. Dominic took point, his Sig Sauer raised. He kicked open the pantry door. A mercenary in black gear was waiting. Before the man could raise his rifle, Dominic put 2 bullets in his chest. The man crumpled. Dominic didn't pause. He stepped over the body, his face a mask of cold fury. This was his home. These were his floors. And now they were stained with blood. They burst into the garage. It was a cavernous space housing Dominic's collection, a Ferrari, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, and an armored Mercedes SUV. "Take the SUV," Dominic ordered, rushing toward the driver's side. "Don't bother," Natasha said, her voice flat. "What?" "Look at the tires." Dominic looked. The run-flat tires of the Mercedes had been slashed. Not just slashed, drilled. Someone knew exactly how to disable the reinforced rubber. The Ferrari and the Rolls were the same. "We're trapped," Dominic growled, the panic rising in his chest. "They disabled the fleet." "Not the whole fleet," Natasha said. She ran past the millions of dollars of luxury metal to the far corner of the garage, where a beat-up grey 2015 Honda Civic was parked. It was the car she used for grocery runs. It had a dent in the bumper and a baby on board sticker. Dominic stared at her. "You want us to escape a hit squad in a Honda?" "Get in!" Natasha yelled, throwing open the back door for Nancy. "Buckle up, Nancy, double, click!" Dominic dove into the passenger seat, just as the garage service door exploded inward. 3 men stormed in, rifles raised. Natasha jumped into the driver's seat. She didn't fumble for keys. The car was push to start, but not the factory kind. She hit a hidden toggle switch under the dashboard. The engine didn't purr like a Civic. It roared. A guttural, deep-throated growl that shook the concrete floor. "What the hell is under the hood?" Dominic shouted over the noise. "LS3 V8 swap, twin turbos, reinforced chassis." Natasha shouted back, slamming the gear stick. "Hold on!" She didn't reverse. She floored it forward, straight through the closed garage door. Crash! The fiberglass door disintegrated. The grey sleeper car shot out into the rainy driveway like a bullet debris flying off the hood. The mercenaries behind them opened fire bullets, sparking off the rear bumper, but Natasha was already drifting the car around the fountain mud, spraying everywhere. "Gate is blocked," Dominic warned. An armored truck was parked sideways across the main exit. "Noted," Natasha said calmly. She didn't slow down. She jerked the wheel hard to the right, aiming for the perimeter wall, where the landscaping rose in a steep, grassy berm. "Natasha, that's a stone wall." Dominic braced himself. "It's a blind spot in the brickwork, structural weakness from the ivy roots. I checked the blueprints," she said. "The car hit the berm at 60 miles per hour. It launched into the air. For a second, they were weightless." Dominic looked over at Nancy in the back. She wasn't screaming. She was holding her breath. The car smashed through the top section of the brick wall, bricks exploding outward, and landed hard on the asphalt of the public road outside. The suspension groaned, sparks flew, but the car held. Natasha shifted gears, the tires screaming as they found traction on the wet road. "We're out," she exhaled. Dominic looked at the maid, the woman who folded his towels, driving a race-tuned sleeper car through a brick wall. "Who exactly did I hire?" he muttered. "The best," she replied, her eyes checking the rearview mirror. "But don't get comfortable. We have company." The rain on the highway was torrential, turning the world into a blur of neon lights and black asphalt. Natasha was doing 90, weaving through the late-night traffic, but the two black SUVs behind them were gaining. "They have strobe lights," Dominic said, watching the pursuers flash police colors. "They're trying to clear the road." "Venezia payroll," Natasha cursed. "Standard tactic. Impersonate law enforcement to minimize civilian interference." "Nancy, cover your ears," Dominic said. He rolled down his window. The wind roared in wet and freezing. He leaned out, aiming his gun back at the lead SUV. He fired 3 rounds. The windshield of the SUV starred, but the glass didn't shatter. "Bulletproof glass." Dominic pulled back in soaking wet. "We can't shoot them out." "Then we take them out," Natasha said. "Open the glove box." Dominic opened it. Inside, nestled among napkins and spare change, was a handful of what looked like heavy, jagged metal jacks. "Caltrops?" Dominic asked, raising an eyebrow. "Throw them. High arc," Natasha ordered. Dominic grabbed the handful of spikes and leaned out again. He waited until the lead SUV surged forward to ram them. He tossed the spikes into the air. They clattered onto the road. The SUV hit them at 80 miles per hour. Pop! Screech! The front tires blew instantly. The SUV swerved violently, lost traction on the wet road, and barrel rolled into the median divider. Metal-crunched sparks showered the highway. "One down!" Dominic yelled. "One left," Natasha said. "But he's not falling back. He's pushing." The second SUV rammed their rear bumper. The Honda jolted forward. Nancy whimpered in the back seat. "Papa!" "It's okay, Nancy. Just a bump." Dominic lied, his voice tight. The SUV rammed them again, harder. The Honda fishtailed. Natasha fought the wheel, her knuckles white. "They're trying to spin us," she said. "Dominic, take the wheel." "What? Take the wheel?" Dominic reached over and grabbed the steering wheel from the passenger side. Natasha unbuckled her seatbelt. She climbed into the back seat, moving with impossible agility in the cramped space. "Keep it steady," she ordered. She kicked out the rear windshield. Glass shattered onto the trunk. The wind howled through the cabin. Natasha lay prone on the back seat, leveling her Glock 19 out the broken rear window. She wasn't aiming at the driver. She was aiming at the grille of the SUV. "Steady," she whispered. The SUV surged for another hit. Bang! Bang! She fired 2 shots directly into the radiator. Steam erupted from the SUV's front end. Bang! The 3rd shot hit the front tire. The SUV veered right, clipping a guardrail and spinning out of control into the darkness behind them. Natasha climbed back into the front seat, breathless. "Clear!" Dominic let go of the wheel, staring at her. "You just neutralized 2 armored vehicles on I-5. "I missed the engine block on the 2nd one," she critiqued herself, wiping rain from her face. "Aim was off." "Where are we going?" Dominic asked. "We can't go to any of my safe houses. If they knew I was home, they know my properties." "We need a clean car. This one is burned," Natasha said. "We're going to the docks. I have a contact at Pier 54, a smuggler. He owes me." They exited the highway, heading toward the industrial district. The Seattle docks were a maze of shipping containers and cranes. It was quiet, eerie. Natasha pulled the steaming Honda behind a stack of blue containers near the water's edge. "Everyone out," she whispered. "Nancy, hold my hand." They stepped out into the rain. The smell of dead fish and diesel was overwhelming. "Where is your contact?" Dominic asked, scanning the shadows. "Container 404, Natasha said, moving toward a red box. They reached it. She knocked a rhythm. Nothing. She knocked again. The door didn't open. Instead, a spotlight from a crane above snapped on, blinding them. "Ambush!" Dominic roared, tackling Natasha and Nancy behind a concrete barrier, just as automatic gunfire erupted from the rooftops of the containers. Bullets chipped the concrete inches from their heads. "Your contact sold you out," Dominic yelled over the noise. "He didn't sell me out." Natasha grimaced, looking at the blood trickling from a graze on her arm. "He's dead. Look." She pointed. Through the gap in the containers, Dominic saw a body slumped near the red box. "We're pinned," Dominic said. "We have the water at our backs and shooters on the high ground. Look at the fuel drums." Natasha pointed to a stack of yellow barrels near the shooter's position. "Acetylene." "If we shoot those, we blow the whole pier," Dominic said. "We'll be caught in the blast." "Not if we're already in the water," Natasha said. She looked at him. "Can you swim?" "Yes, but Nancy." "I've got her," Natasha said. She grabbed a heavy tarp from a pallet nearby. "Nancy, we're going to play the mermaid game." Deep breath. "Hold it until I squeeze your hand." "Okay," Nancy whispered, terrified but trusting. "Dominic," Natasha handed him her spare magazine. "On my mark, you light up those drums, then you dive. Don't look back. What about you?" "I'll cover the jump. Go." Dominic stood up, exposing himself. He aimed at the yellow drums 50 yards away. Bang, bang, bang. Sparks flew. Then ignition. The explosion was deafening. A fireball rolled into the sky, turning the night into day. The force of the blast knocked the shooters off the containers. "Jump!" Natasha screamed. She grabbed Nancy and vaulted off the pier into the dark, freezing water of the Puget Sound. Dominic fired one last round at a shadow moving toward them, then turned and dove. The cold hit him like a hammer. He swam deep, the muffled sound of the explosion vibrating in his chest. He found Natasha underwater, holding Nancy tight, kicking toward the pilings of a neighboring dock where an old fishing boat was moored. They broke the surface under the rotting wood of the old pier, gasping for air. Debris from the explosion was raining down on the water, sizzling. Sirens wailed in the distance. Dominic pulled himself up a rusty ladder, then hauled Natasha and Nancy up. They collapsed on the wooden planks, shivering, soaked and battered. Dominic's shoulder was throbbing. He looked down and saw blood, shrapnel from the blast. Natasha was clutching her side. A piece of metal debris had caught her there. "We need to keep moving." Natasha gasped, her face pale. "There's a jeep. 3 towns over. My stash." "We can't walk 3 towns." Dominic coughed. "No." Natasha pointed to the old jeep parked at the end of this abandoned pier. It wasn't the stash she meant, but it was a vehicle. "We take that one. We drive until it dies. Then we steal another." Dominic looked at her. She was bleeding, freezing, and exhausted. And she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "You're crazy," Dominic said, helping her stand. "I'm alive," she retorted. "Let's keep it that way." They limped toward the jeep, leaving the burning pier behind them, heading toward the mountains and the cabin that awaited them. The safe house was less of a house and more of a fortress, disguised as a log cabin. Nestled deep in the North Cascades, it was off the grid, surrounded by miles of dense pine forest. The air was thin and cold, biting at their wet clothes, as Natasha killed the engine of the backup jeep they had stolen 3 towns over. Dominic stumbled out, clutching his shoulder. The bullet graze was deep, and he had lost blood. Natasha wasn't much better. The shrapnel in her side from the dock explosion was festering, but neither of them complained. Nancy was the priority. "Inside," Natasha commanded, supporting Dominic's weight. "Nancy, hold on to my belt loop. Don't let go." They breached the cabin. It was dusty, smelling of cedar and disuse. Natasha immediately went into protocol mode. She sat Dominic on the leather sofa, checked the windows, and engaged the manual locks. "First aid kit is in the bathroom under the sink." Dominic grumbled, his face pale. "Generator is out back." "I'll handle the medical. You handle staying conscious," Natasha said. She guided Nancy to a chair. "Nancy, I need you to be brave. I have to fix your papa's arm. It's going to hurt him and he might yell, but he's okay. Understand?" Nancy nodded, her lower lip trembling, but she didn't cry. "I can help. I can hold the bandages." Natasha looked at the girl, this child who had been thrown into a war zone, and saw a flicker of Dominic's iron will. "Okay, you hold the bandages." For the next hour, the kitchen table became an operating theater. Natasha cleaned and stitched Dominic's wound with the steady hands of someone who had done this 12 times in safe houses across Europe. Dominic watched her through half-lidded eyes. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a searing pain and a strange, quiet intimacy. He watched how she spoke to Nancy, guiding the girl's hands to pass the gauze, making her feel useful instead of helpless. He watched the sweat bead on Natasha's forehead, the way her wet hair plastered to her neck. "You're good at this," Dominic murmured as she tied off the suture. "Field medicine," she said curtly. "Part of the training." "Why did you leave Interpol?" he asked. "Really?" Natasha paused, wiping the blood from her hands. She looked at Nancy, ensuring the girl was out of earshot, busy with a juice box in the living room. "I didn't leave," she whispered. "I was burned. My handler. He was the one leaking info to the Venezia. When he found out, I knew he framed me. Froze my accounts, put a red notice on me. I couldn't go home. I couldn't go to the police. The only way to clear my name and avenge my son was to take down the Venezia myself. And the key to the Venezia was me," Dominic finished. "Was you," she admitted. "I came here to use you, Dominic. I planned to gather evidence of your dealings with them and hand it all over to The Hague. And now, Dominic asked, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Natasha looked at the bandage on his shoulder, then up at his face. The distance between them felt charged electric. Now, I realized you're just another pawn on their board. And I don't sacrifice pawns. She stood up abruptly. I need to check the perimeter. Dominic watched her go, his mind reeling. She was his enemy. She was a Fed. But God help him, he trusted her more than anyone he had ever known. Days turned into a week. The cabin became a strange domestic bubble suspended in time. Dominic recovered slowly, his strength returning with the mountain air. The dynamic shifted. Dominic, usually the one giving orders, found himself listening. Natasha ran the show. She set up tripwires in the forest. She established a patrol rotation. She cooked meals out of canned beans and venison she hunted herself. But the most surprising thing was the training. Every morning in the clearing behind the cabin, Natasha trained Nancy. Dominic stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching. Use your cane as an extension, Natasha instructed. It's not just for feeling the ground. It's a probe, a shield. Sweep the leg. Nancy moved with growing confidence. She wasn't the fragile doll anymore. She was becoming aware of her space. One evening after Nancy had gone to sleep, Dominic found Natasha sitting by the fireplace, cleaning her Glock. The firelight danced on her face, softening the hard lines of her expression. You're teaching her to survive without me, Dominic said, sitting opposite her. Natasha didn't look up. I'm teaching her to survive, period. Men like you don't live to be old, Dominic. We both know that. Is that a threat? It's a statistic. Dominic leaned forward. What about you? Do women like you live to be old? Natasha stopped cleaning. She looked into the fire. No. We usually die in a motel room or a ditch alone. You're not alone now, Dominic said. The silence stretched heavy and thick. Dominic reached out, covering her hand with his. Her skin was rough, calloused from guns and work, but to him it felt perfect. Natasha, he said low, we need to talk about what happens when we go back. We aren't going back yet. We're outnumbered. I have a stash, Dominic said. Not money, information. The Venezia think they bought Russo, but I have leverage on the Venezia capo. Hard drives, recordings. I kept them for insurance. Where? Natasha's eyes sharpened. In the vault at the Midnight Club. My club downtown. That place will be swarming with Russo's men. Natasha shook her head. It's a fortress. It is. Dominic grinned a wicked, wolfish grin, returning to his face. But I know the architect, and I have the best operator in the world sitting on my couch. Natasha looked at his hand on hers. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. It was a gesture of partnership, but it felt like something more. If we do this, Natasha said softly, it's a one-way trip. We take the club, we expose Russo. We cripple the Venezia. But if we fail, we won't fail, Dominic said, squeezing her hand. Because they're looking for a Mafia don. They aren't expecting a ghost. He stood up, pulling her up with him. They stood close, the heat of the fire pressing against them. Dominic looked at her lips, then into her eyes. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted it more than he had wanted anything in years, but he respected her too much to make it a distraction before the battle. He leaned in, brushing his forehead against hers. Get some sleep, Maid, he whispered. Tomorrow we go to war. Seattle was drowning in rain again when they returned. They left Nancy with an old contact of Dominic's, a retired nun who ran a safe orphanage in the suburbs. It broke Dominic's heart to leave her, but he couldn't take her into the fire. "Come back," Nancy had whispered, touching Dominic's face, then Natasha's. "Both of you." Now they sat in a stolen utility van outside the Midnight Club. It was Friday night. The club was thumping neon lights reflecting on the wet pavement. "Russo is inside," Natasha said, lowering her binoculars. "I saw his detail at the VIP entrance." "He's celebrating his coronation," Dominic spat. "Let's crash the party." The plan was insane. Natasha loved it. They didn't go in the back. They didn't sneak in the vents. They walked in the front door. Dominic wore a long trench coat and a fedora, face lowered. Natasha wore a stunning red dress she had acquired from a boutique with a slit high up the thigh where a throwing knife was strapped. She looked breathtaking. She looked like a distraction. And she was. They walked past the bouncers. Dominic flashed a VIP card that was technically deactivated, but he knew the bouncer, Big Mike. Mike looked at the card, then at Dominic's eyes. Recognition flashed. Panic followed. Dominic placed a finger to his lips and pressed a roll of cash into Mike's hand. "Go home to your kids, Mike. Tonight's gonna get loud." Mike nodded, sweating, and stepped aside. They entered the club. The bass thumped in their chests. The floor was packed with bodies. "VIP is on the mezzanine," Dominic shouted over the music. "The vault is in the office behind the bar." "I'll clear the path," Natasha said. She didn't use a gun. Not yet. She walked onto the dance floor, moving with the rhythm cutting a path through the crowd. She spotted the two guards at the bottom of the VIP stairs. She stumbled, spilling a drink on one of them. "Hey, watch it," the guard snarled. "I'm so sorry," she slurred, leaning in. "I think I twisted my ankle." As the guard looked down, she struck. A palm strike to the throat, silent and devastating. As he gagged, she spun and kicked the second guard in the knee, snapping the joint. Before they hit the floor, Dominic was there. He grabbed them, dragging them into a dark alcove. "Up," he signaled. They ascended the stairs. The VIP lounge was filled with smoke and laughter. At the center table sat Russo, surrounded by Venezia lieutenants. He was laughing, a glass of scotch in his hand. Dominic stepped into the light. He shed the trench coat, revealing the dual holsters and the cold fury of a man returned from the dead. The music seemed to stop. The laughter died. "Hello, Julian," Dominic said, his voice carrying across the room. Russo dropped his glass. It shattered. "Dom, you're dead." "I'm hard to kill." Dominic stepped forward. "I hear you've been sitting in my chair." "Kill him!" Russo shrieked, scrambling back. 10 men drew weapons. "Now!" Dominic yelled. Natasha, who had flanked the room in the shadows, cut the main power line to the VIP section. Darkness. The club downstairs was still thumping, flashing lights bleeding up into the balcony, creating a strobe effect. It was a nightmare environment for untrained shooters. But for Natasha and Dominic, it was a playground. Bang, bang, thud. Muzzle flashes illuminated the chaos. Natasha moved like a dancer, shooting, moving, striking. Dominic was a tank, advancing on Russo's position, taking shots to his vest, but not slowing down. "You sold my daughter!" Dominic roared, flipping a table and shooting a man who popped up behind it. "You sold my wife!" Russo was crawling toward the exit, terrified. He fired his gold-plated pistol blindly. Dominic reached him. He kicked the gun out of Russo's hand and grabbed him by the lapels, slamming him onto the railing, overlooking the dance floor below. "Don't, Dom, please. It was business, just business." Russo pleaded, blood bubbling on his lips. Dominic pressed his gun to Russo's forehead. Below them, hundreds of people danced, unaware that a king was about to die above them. "This isn't business," Dominic whispered. "It's family." Click. Dominic pulled the trigger. Nothing. Click. Jammed. Russo's eyes went wide with hope. He pulled a knife from his boot and lunged. "Dominic!" Natasha screamed. She was across the room, out of ammo. She threw the only thing she had left, the knife from her thigh holster. It spun through the air, glinting in the strobe light. It buried itself in Russo's shoulder. He screamed, dropping his knife. Dominic didn't waste the second chance. He grabbed Russo by the belt and the neck. "Fly," Dominic growled. He heaved Russo over the railing. The traitor fell 2 stories, crashing onto the main bar below in a shower of glass and expensive liquor. The music finally cut out. Screams erupted. Dominic looked across the room at Natasha. She was breathing hard blood on her red dress, her hair wild. She smiled. "We need to get the drive," she panted. "Office, now!" They kicked open the office door. Dominic went to the safe behind the painting. He spun the dial. Click. The heavy door swung open. "Empty," Dominic said, his voice hollow. "What?" Natasha rushed over. The safe was bare. No hard drives, no leverage. And then a phone, sitting on the empty shelf, began to ring. Dominic picked it up. "Hello." "Did you really think I'd leave the insurance there, Dominic?" A deep, accented voice spoke. It was the Venezia Don himself. "You killed my puppet Russo. Good. He was annoying. But you forgot one thing." "What?" Dominic snarled. "The orphanage? Did you really think a retired nun could hide a child from the Venezia?" Dominic's heart stopped. The phone slipped from his hand. "Nancy," he whispered. Natasha saw his face. She knew instantly. "They have her," Dominic said, his voice breaking. "They have her." The Venezia stronghold wasn't a house. It was a shipyard on the edge of the Puget Sound, a maze of rusted shipping containers, cranes, and wet asphalt. It was a place where screams were drowned out by the foghorns and the grinding of industrial steel. Dominic drove the van through the chain-link fence, not bothering with stealth. He smashed through the gate tires, screeching, and drifted to a halt in the center of the main loading bay. "They know we're here," Natasha said, checking her last magazine. She had 12 bullets left. Dominic had 7. "Good," Dominic growled. His eyes were void of humanity. He wasn't a Don anymore. He was a father whose heart had been ripped out of his chest. "I want them to see me coming." Floodlights snapped on, blinding them. High above on a catwalk, suspended over the shipping containers, stood Don Salvar. He was an older man, rot eating him from the inside out, dressed in a pristine white suit that looked out of place in the grime. And beside him, dangling precariously over the edge, held only by a rope around her wrists, was Nancy. "Nancy!" Dominic screamed, stepping out of the van, his gun raised. "Papa!" Her voice was small, terrified but distinct. "Ah, the prodigal son returns!" Salvar's voice boomed over a PA system. "Drop the weapons, Dominic, or I cut the rope. She falls 40 feet onto concrete. I don't think even your little maid can patch that up." Dominic froze. He looked at Natasha. Slowly they placed their guns on the wet ground and kicked them away. "Smart," Salva sneered. "Bring them up." A dozen armed guards surrounded them, shoving them toward the metal stairs. Dominic's muscles were coiled tight, waiting for an opening. but with Nancy dangling like that, he was paralyzed. They were marched up to the catwalk. The wind was stronger up here, smelling of salt and diesel. Salva held a knife near the rope. Nancy was sobbing quietly, her feet kicking in the empty air. "You took my business, Salva," Dominic said, his voice low and dangerous. "You tried to kill me. Fine, but let the girl go. She's blind. She's nothing to you." "She is everything," Salva smiled, his teeth yellow. "She is the heir. If I kill you, the Corbin family rallies around her. Loyalty is a pest. But if I kill her first, then you have nothing to fight for. You break." Natasha spoke up. "You're a coward, Salva, hiding behind a little girl." Salva looked at Natasha. "And you, the traitor agent. I have a special place for you in the bottom of the Sound." Dominic looked at Nancy. She wasn't just crying anymore. She had stopped kicking. Her head was tilted. She was doing exactly what Natasha had taught her in the solarium. She was listening. "Papa," Nancy whispered. The wind carried her voice. "I'm here, baby," Dominic said. "3 steps," Nancy said. Salva frowned. What is she babbling about? "Right." Nancy continued, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "Metal. Hollow." Dominic's eyes widened. He realized what she was doing. She was echolocating. She was mapping the platform based on the sound of Salva's voice and the wind whistling through the grating. "Nancy," Natasha said, her voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the tension. "Code word." Salva looked confused. "Code word." Nancy took a deep breath. She swung her legs back, building momentum. "Sunrise!" Nancy screamed. It happened in a heartbeat. On the word sunrise, Nancy didn't just hang there. She swung her legs up, wrapping them around the railing post she was dangling from, and hauled herself up with a gymnast's strength. At the exact same moment, Natasha dropped. Not to the ground, but to her knees. She pulled a backup blade from her boot, one the guards had missed, and slashed the Achilles tendon of the guard behind her. The guard screamed and fired his gun into the air. The distraction was all Dominic needed. He didn't go for the guards. He went for Salva. Dominic tackled the old man, slamming him into the railing. The knife skittered away, falling over the edge. "Get her!" Salva shrieked, clawing at Dominic's face. 2 guards rushed toward Nancy, who was trying to untie her wrists with her teeth. "No, you don't!" Natasha roared. She picked up the fallen guard's assault rifle. She didn't have a clear shot at the men near Nancy without risking hitting the child. "Nancy, drop!" Natasha yelled. Nancy didn't hesitate. She released her hold on the railing and dropped to the metal grate floor, flattening herself. Rat-a-tat-tat, Natasha fired a controlled burst just above Nancy's head. The 2 guards approaching her dropped chests riddled with bullets. Dominic was locked in a struggle with Salva. The old man was surprisingly strong, fueled by desperation. He had his hands around Dominic's throat, squeezing. "You die today, Corbin," Salva spat. Dominic's vision blurred. He reached for his belt, but he had no weapon. Then a small hand reached through the railing bars. It was Nancy. She wasn't running away. She was reaching for something on the floor. The knife. She couldn't see it, but she had heard it hit the metal. She felt the vibration. Her fingers closed around the handle. "Papa!" she screamed. She slid the knife across the grating toward him. Dominic's hand found the hilt. He looked into Salva's eyes. "My daughter sends her regards." Dominic drove the blade upward under Salva's ribs. The old Don gasped, his grip loosening instantly. He staggered back, blood blooming on his white suit. He looked at Nancy, the blind girl he had dismissed as broken with horror in his dying eyes. "She saw you," Dominic whispered. "She saw you better than you saw yourself." Dominic kicked Salvar in the chest. The Venezia Don tumbled over the railing, screaming all the way down, until a wet thud silenced him forever. Silence returned to the shipyard. Dominic scrambled over to Nancy. He cut the ropes binding her wrists. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair. She was shaking, but she was alive. "I did it, Papa," she sobbed into his coat. "I heard him. I heard where the knife was. You did it, baby. You saved us." Dominic choked out tears streaming down his face for the first time in years. Natasha limped over. She was bleeding from a new graze on her cheek, but she was smiling. She dropped the rifle and knelt beside them. Nancy reached out her small hands, patting the air, until she found Natasha's face. "Sarah?" Nancy asked, using the maid name. "Natasha," the woman corrected softly, covering Nancy's hand with hers. "My name is Natasha." "Natasha." Nancy tested the name. "You stayed." "I told you." Natasha said, her voice thick with emotion, looking up at Dominic. "I don't sacrifice pawns, and I never leave family behind." Dominic looked at Natasha over his daughter's head. The war was over. The Venezia were headless. The Corbans were the undisputed kings of the coast. But none of that mattered. "Let's go home," Dominic said. 3 months later, the Corban estate had changed. The dark, heavy curtains were gone, replaced by sheer linen that let the sunlight pour in. The security was still tight. Kael was back on duty, sporting a new scar and a grumpier attitude, but the atmosphere was different. It was lighter. In the garden, Nancy was running, not walking with a cane. Running. She followed the sound of a small bell attached to a golden retriever's collar, a therapy dog Natasha had brought home a week ago. On the terrace, Dominic sat with a cup of coffee watching them. He didn't wear suits on Sundays anymore. He wore jeans and a t-shirt. The glass door slid open. Natasha walked out. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform. She wasn't wearing tactical gear. She wore a simple sundress, her hair loose. She sat on the arm of his chair, stealing a sip of his coffee. "Interpol officially closed my file today," she said casually. "Dead in the line of duty, tragically lost at sea." "A terrible loss." Dominic smirked, wrapping an arm around her waist. "And yet, here you are." "Here I am," she said, resting her hand on his shoulder. "Unemployed, homeless." "I'm hiring," Dominic said. "Oh, what's the position?" "Head of security," Dominic suggested. Natasha shook her head. "Too stressful." "Consigliere. Too much paperwork." Dominic pulled her down so she was sitting in his lap. He looked into her eyes, the eyes of the woman who had saved his life, his daughter, and his soul. "What about wife?" Dominic asked softly. "The pay is terrible, but the benefits are decent." Natasha smiled, leaning in until their lips were inches apart. She glanced at the ring Dominic pulled from his pocket, a simple diamond, elegant and strong. "I don't know," she whispered. "I hear the boss is a dangerous man." He was. Dominic promised, kissing her deep and slow as their daughter's laughter floated up from the garden. Now, he's just a man who knows how lucky he is. The sun set over the estate, casting long shadows, but for the first time in a long time, the Corban family wasn't afraid of the dark. They knew how to fight in it. Wow. From a quiet maid scrubbing floors to a rogue agent taking down an entire crime syndicate, Natasha Voigt is definitely not someone you want to mess with. And let's talk about Nancy, that moment on the catwalk where she used her hearing to find the knife. That is officially one of the most badass moments in storytelling history. Dominic thought he was hiring help, but he ended up hiring a hero. It just goes to show underestimating someone because of their disability or their job title is the quickest way to lose the war. If you loved this twists and turns Mafia romance, and if you want to see more stories where the underdog takes the crown, make sure you smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new story. What did you think of Dominic's proposal at the end? Was it perfect, or should he have done it differently? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.